So this scenario is incredibly normal for me. I want you to listen to this. I want you to imagine it. And it has to do with creating brilliant ideas that nobody has thought about. But not only that, they meet the criteria that they're important, that they change the world, and they have some sort of impact. And this story is so fundamental to every experience I've ever had. In fact, if you go on to Y Combinator, for example, you look at all of their so Y Combinator is this really fancy schmancy business accelerator that's basically created most of the large companies that we know of today that are household names that come from Silicon Valley, Airbnb and companies like that. Um, it is very common. And also study this. I study innovation. I study entrepreneurship. I'm very well aware of this, but it's also my experience. And this is the story, is you have an idea and you're really excited about it. And you share it with somebody and they say, it's not quite good enough. And your immediate reaction is that you think, you internalize it, you think that you're not good enough, you think that what you're thinking about is pathetic, and you immediately get upset and you want to run away and cry, right? Like, I think there's two responses that happen. Its first one is like, how dare you? And then the other response, and this is me, um, is I feel like I want to cry, right? We have a fight or flight response. And this is so normal to the process of creating ideas. I no longer think about how do I sharpen idea. I think about how do I ensure that the other person receiving what I'm saying is not going to be crushed inside. And it's a lot different, and it's very difficult for me. I'm still figuring this out. I'm not good. I've been doing this for a while. I'm not good at it. But my approach is fundamentally different. In every meeting that I have now, I try to reassure. I spend more time thinking and talking about how is it somebody else is doing better, and that includes myself, right? In sort of thinking about how is it that I can tell myself that what I'm doing is spectacular, right? And this is the fundamental reason why, if you were to look at any of these incubators, they talk about getting a co-founder, because the process and finding a co-founder is very difficult because most people don't understand this. They don't get it. But for the most part, and that even includes OpenAI, right? If you start looking at, gosh, I forget the guy's name, but the guy who runs OpenAI now, he spent a great deal of time at Y Combinator, sort of thinking about how things actually work and finding the right team. And I want you to think about this, is that Sam Altman, that's what I'm thinking about. I want you to think about this, is how do you start off with something? Like, inevitably, you're going to think, oh, this is really great, or this is terrible, right? And both of those are probably the wrong way of going about it. Every idea, everything that you ever work on that actually has impact starts out boring, tedious, yet often don't want to do it. And it's frustrating as all get out. It's very dark. It's very, very, very dark, right? The whole process is extraordinarily dark. It's lonely. You feel like you're exposed. You feel that nobody knows what you're talking about. Uh, and all sorts of different combinations, and it's all typically very negative. And then this is the moment when you're by yourself, you have a tremendous amount of excitement, right? Unless you're working with somebody that is engaging in what's called yes and thinking. Yes and thinking. It's this idea that you can build on top of other people, and what they're doing is really good, right? And that's really difficult. So first of all, that requires both somebody that is at your intellectual level, right? And that you won't take offense to when they suggest something different. It's extraordinarily hard to find. I rarely engage in that way, right? Like that sort of back and forth, yes, and this is really fun. Um, that is most of my experiences from that way. Most of my experiences, and I believe most people, is that they have this sort of breakthrough. They're in the shower, they're walking, they're like, oh, this is really exciting, I think. And then you propose it. You really, for that brief moment of sheer pleasure, right? And that's what we're all chasing, right? I just had that the other day. I had it yesterday morning. I was working on something and how to illustrate a certain thing. And it was ugly. The first approach I had was ugly. And then I had just like one morning, I was like, oh, I can do this. I'm like, shit, why didn't I think of doing that before? Um, and then, I tried to do it. It looked ugly, that approach, but I found a different way that was much more presentable and much more easier to understand. And I think it's lovely. I think it's at least a lovely presentation. So, um, what I want you to really think about is that every idea that you're ever going to go through, everything that you work on is going to be frustrating, ugly, you know, it's not going to work as is, right? Like when you go and you train and you train for something, right? First time you do that, maybe you're young, everything's going to work out just fine, right? You're gonna things are gonna work out. You might like do really well, but they'll reach a moment where two things are gonna happen, right? The level of what you want to compete at increases, and you have to figure out, how do I change things? How do I adjust things so that I can pursue what I want to pursue uh, at a reasonable level? Extraordinarily frustrating, painful as all get out. The other approach, the other thing that's going to happen, you're going to be going along and then ping, right? There'll be a little ping. They'll be like, well, what's that feeling? That doesn't work. That doesn't work that well. That feels weird. There's stiffness. There's something that's not going right. And the first response that you have is you ignore it. But over time, it sort of festers and gets worse. And then you have to figure out, how do I adjust given that I've got this particular thing, whether, if you're in sports, it's an injury. How do I adjust so I continue to love what I'm doing and do well with this injury? Um, or, in the intellectual game is, yeah, okay, this thing is somewhat ugly in this approach, but how do I adjust to feel that it's actually tackling the problem that I want to tackle? How do I adjust when somebody comes after me? Right? Like how do I change this and really do well? And this is true with virtually every aspect of our lives. My life is sort of focused on research. How do you craft ideas? How do you think about them? But then your life is maybe you're in the business world. You have a little franchise, right? You have this tiny little franchise. Maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's, a Subway, the Subway sandwich restaurant, TM. um, maybe it's something like that. And you're thinking about, not only how do I do this, but how do I adjust? How do I get the word out? What do I do that's novel, that's interesting, that I can possibly do and, you know, get it into the zeitgeist, right? We're always sort of shaping these things and thinking about these things. And when you do that, Imagine you're the Subway owner of this franchise. You're going to run into all sorts of problems, right? You're going to want to do this. Maybe your regional manager says you can't do this thing. You want to put out social media and, like they say, no, you can't do that. And maybe you go out onto the street with a flag. They say, no, you can't do that. We got to do this subway approach. And you have to figure out how to do things creatively so that you can actually adjust and do well, right? But also do the things that are within your particular domain. And it's very, very frustrating. And most people, 99% of the people, they try, or maybe they have that insight and then they get their hand slapped and then they stand down, right? They're like, oh, whatever. It's not worth my time and effort. But the people that do spectacularly well, they get their hand slapped and then they think, oh, okay, well, that didn't work out the way that I planned. Let's figure out a way to adjust, to tackle this and do something that is important, right? Let's figure it out. Let's go through and adjust so that I can compete in my particular market and do spectacularly well. And I don't like the notion of competition, but there is this, because competition makes you think about like, a zero sum game. And what I'm actually saying is like, how do you redefine things? How do you push the envelope? How do you, really tackle things that are really important and grow your particular market, right? So it's not thinking a zero sum game is where you think everything is fixed, the world is fixed, and you have X number of players and you're competing against those X number of players for the same resources. Not going to work out in your scenario most times, right? Like you might be able to do well, but if you're competing against other Subway restaurants and other things that are identical, the only thing you can compete on in that case is location. So in this scenario, what you want to think about is how you can creatively approach issues and come up with new ideas without getting frustrated, without getting shut down too much, so that you can continue on and carve something out. So all of our lives are always doing that. If you're bright, you want to think about, there is this world I live in. How do I pursue it in a different way so I can do better? Right? How do I move the needle? What does that look like for me of moving up or moving the needle? And it often means, okay, we've got to adjust with what we actually have at this moment so that we can do well. And when we do that, when we interact with the environment, the natural response that we're going to get, if we're thinking about feedback and learning, it's almost always negative, right? Somebody is going to say, don't do that. That's the wrong thing. That's very typical, right? And your chance of getting the 1 in 1,000 of the person that says, what you're doing is amazing, keep doing that is very unlikely. Your job is to look at the world and say, okay, how do I adjust given that that's going to happen to sell my idea or to do my thing so that I can pursue it and do well? That is a hard problem. But the only way that I know that works, because I live in this world, right? That's my job as an academic, is to sort of push boundaries, to look at the world differently, is to create an environment where everybody feels supported. And no matter what idea is proposed or whatever you pursue, you can step back up and you could say, you know what, that wasn't so bad. Let's go do that again. Right. So it's minimizing the times that you get hand slapped, right? Saying, oh, that was silly. Why would they ever do something like that? Um, minimizing it so that you feel comfortable but also allowing people to sort of pursue things that are a little bit crazy and a little bit, what we would normally think is off the rocker or we don't understand or whatever, right? Like any of those combinations where we just simply say, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And that aspect of things, first of all, in my career, that is a huge chunk of it. It's not everything, but that is a big chunk of it, right? I would say 10 to 20% is pursuing those things. In a lot of people's career, it's like 1%. It's a much smaller amount, right? Because they're not focused on doing research and development all of the time. But it's still an important aspect of life. And it's still a very, very important thing. And it's taking a step back and saying, how do we create an environment where everything that we pursue is encouraged in a healthy way, right? Obviously, we don't want people to sort of jump out windows and shoot things, just things that are dangerous. But what are some things that we could do to move the needle and create this very healthy environment? Healthy in the sense that people don't feel afraid to pursue things that are typically unusual, that are, somewhat scary, right? So, first thing you could do is reduce ambiguity as much as possible. Make sure that there's sort of clear cuts, things. But if somebody breaches the rules and there's good reason to breach the rules, you just encourage them and say, you know what, that's actually not a bad idea. Let's figure this out. Right. So reducing ambiguity, important because that's what drives a lot of these feelings that we have. That's kind of something that we fundamentally know of this is scary, all that kind of stuff, and doing the wrong thing. But then as well as encouraging weird, strange, lovely behavior, right? Whatever that looks like. And it's all different in everybody's domain. But um, when you pursue things, you'll know what it is, right? Because people look at you sideways. They, why are you doing this? An example that that I think about a lot um, is so I used to have this summer job, or part of it, half of it was doing brickwork, right? So it's kind of a bricklayer for half a summer. The other half I was working at a camp, a fish camp. Great experience, lovely people. Um, but part of it was the Bonnie Bay Fish Camp. You can look it up. It's a beautiful spot. But part of what I was doing when I was doing this brickwork is you have to lay out patterns uh, of brickwork so that it all kind of fits together and you put a number on them so people know. Well, I just finished my degree in engineering, so I knew a little bit about Roman numerals, right? I knew 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those kind of things. And so I was labeling them in Roman numerals because I had chalk. And the chalk was easier to just write lines, right? Like if you think about it, that's the reason, actually, I believe, that's the reason why they were using Roman numerals a long time ago, is because it's easy to sort of carve these things out. Um, so, but when I did that, um, there was no harm, no difference, anything like that. They thought it was really strange, and they poked fun of me. And they thought, this guy's goofy. Thankfully, it was within they were very supportive, wonderful guy that was running the show. Simply just laughed it off, and he thought, he was just like, "Oh, this is goofy," um, and that gave me the courage to do other things that were just as goofy or just as, I just felt safe, right, to do those things, even though it was a little bit different than what everybody else does or they think about. Right, so I want you to think about these things. There's all sorts of moments like this that happen that simply because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean it's wrong, right? Simply because it's kind of an unusual behavior doesn't mean it's wrong, but you have to figure it out And the only way that you sort of move the needle is to try different things that are very low cost, right? But create an environment where people pursue things, where they think about things so that they feel comfortable and they could speak about ideas in a very healthy way. Extraordinarily difficult to do. I'm not saying that this is easy and I'm continuously learning how to do this, but a lot of it has to do with continuously, first of all, being steadfast as much as possible, right? Reducing that ambiguity. And then as well, getting back up and doing it again and repeating, but telling other people it's okay, right? So pushing a little bit, right? Pushing just enough, but at the same time telling people it's okay to do things that are different. Now, I screw it up all of the time, right? I know I screwed up with my kids. I know that I screwed up with my life and other areas. I know that, but it's coming back to this repeated effort of trying to do that over and over and over again so that you become somebody that is well known to be there to be helpful, but also to reduce all of that stress that we feel when we do things that are different and unique. If you do that, and if you coach people to do that collectively on a mass scale in the area that you're in the domain that you're in, if you can do that, right? So you're in a company, you're in your little franchise, your Subway franchise, and you coach people to say that it's okay, right? Like it's okay. Uh, and if they do something that's slightly unusual and it doesn't really screw things up a little bit, maybe you waste a little bit, right? You waste a little bit of meat or bread and it costs you $100, right? Shrug it off, right? Go back and figure out how to do it again. Try to extract a lesson from what's actually going on, shrug it off, and try to pursue that again and try to see what happens, right? And encourage people to pursue these things. One of the things that you're going to realize it is more daunting to you. Right now, I'm saying this and you're thinking, yeah, whatever, I'm not going to do this. That is the problem, right? That is the fundamental problem is that it's more daunting for people to even think about it. It is extraordinarily hard for people to even think about it, of doing something that's different than actually performing it. So you could shout at the rooftops, go try to do something different. I'm going to be supportive. People are not going to want to listen to you. And it's going to take you a lot of years, a lot of coaching, where you create the safe environment for people to get back up and try it again and go back and do it over and over and over again. It's a very difficult process. I'm not saying any of this is easy. You're going to be frustrated. You as a person that's trying to create this to happen, you're going to think in your head, why isn't anybody doing this? You have to continuously work on it and move the needle and think about how to create a safe space at any moment in any environment and figure out how to move all of the incentives. Like there's a lot of work to be done, right? Like there's incentives, there's, structure, there's culture, there's a bunch of stuff that you have to change, but you got to constantly be pushing and prodding so that people feel comfortable. And it's hard. It's a lot of work. But if you do that, you might get a fleeting moment where things are really fun and exciting. I'm saying you might get a fleeting moment because it's never long lasting. It's very difficult to keep this up. And it requires kind of a collective effort on everybody to stand up and say that this is actually important. It takes one person out of a group of 100 to ruin it all for everybody. Right? So figuring it out, working on it, coaching is super important, but also figuring out how to make sure that that one person doesn't spoil the soup. Right? Think about that repeatedly. How do you create safe spaces so that people feel comfortable to pursue the things that they want to pursue? This is the recipe. It's hard. It's grinding work, but you'll get glimpses of it every once in a while, and you'll see somebody do it really spectacularly well, and you'll say, "How do I do that?" But you keep doing it over and over and over again. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.